Hey guys, and welcome to the Reading Corner. Today we're reading a book from Archive of Our Own. Before we get started, I want to say thank you to anyone who's listening. Now, without further ado, let's do it. Chapter 1 Alcohol Chapter 1 Alcohol Alternative. Chapter 1 Alcohol Alternative to Feeling Like Yourself. Cecil looked at about the safe house that Napoleon had managed to keep hidden from the police when all Roman stuff was seized. The place looked like a literal minefield, books and papers strewn everywhere. As it turned out, when you joined a new school halfway through the year, you have a lot to make up for. She and Penny at least had the benefit of time spent at Atlas, where things moved at a more brutal pace. The real problem was keeping Emerald and Neo in line and studying. It was an impossible task. I can't anymore. I need a drink. Emerald stood up and went toward a nearby bar while Neo gasped excitedly, pushing her books away and making grabby hands. Cecil huffed and closed her own book a little harder than she meant to. You can't stop now. What do you mean, a drink? She knew her order of offense said more about her than she liked to admit, but too late now. Emerald showed a surprising level of skill with the bottles and glasses. She couldn't help but admit it was quite an interesting show. Look, you can only cram so much stuff into your brain at one time. That's like science. Plus, Neo and I are students under duress. As long as we continue to pass, we're fine. At the end of the day, we can take down Grim without breaking a sweat. Everything after that is just details. Penny looked at her with a helpless shrug. She is not entirely wrong. The human brain learns much better over a long period of time. Attempting to push an entire semester's worth of knowledge into your brain over the course of only a few weeks is a monumental task. Her face fell slightly as a new thought occurred to her. I'm afraid I cannot join you in drinking alcohol, though. Alcohol has no effect on me. The temporary bartender looked at her in surprise, but Emerald eventually shrugged with a good-natured smile. Well, I can still make you something tasty. You've got taste receptors or whatever, right? I've seen you destroy entire bowls of noodles. Ooh, yes, something fruity would be most appreciated. Cecil knew when she was in the minority, so she set her book aside and let herself get a little more relaxed in the seat. Oh, fine. If a glass of whiskey should happen to find its way into my hand, I wouldn't say no. Everyone stopped what they were doing and looked at her in surprise. Emerald was mid-shake, her eyebrows now practically past the top of her head. Are you serious? Somehow she should have known this would cause everyone to freak out a little. I'm sure most people assume my parents are just like me, strict and uptight and boring, but my parents are actually very laid back, practically hippies. Let me start drinking a few years ago. I already have a respectable tolerance. Finally, Emerald shrugged and went back to shaking the drink she was working on. You're the boss, Captain. Emerald was the type to use a lot of nicknames, and since Cecil was obsessively in charge, that was a common one for her to use. Okay, so if your parents are like that, then why are you like this? Neo asked, adding a vague hand gesture to Cecil's entire body. The question was a fair one to some extent. Cecil didn't have a great answer. She knew that the other girls had rather strained relationships, or no relationship at all, with their parents, so she wanted to step lightly on this topic. Some children try to emulate their parents, others try to break away from them. I love mine, but they can be so messy and unorganized, and constantly late. So I became obsessed with order and punctuality, which I suppose explains my semblance. Perhaps unsurprisingly, Emerald actually did bring her a drink she didn't exactly request, and passed it to her with a little amused smirk. Cecil took it and sipped it slowly, nothing immediately that whatever they had in their stock was quality. Noting immediately that whatever they had in their stock was quality. Penny tasted her own drink and cooed happily. This is very delicious, Emerald. It's a shame I'm incapable of becoming inebriated. I suppose I could attempt to shut down some of my systems to mimic the effect. Do it, do it, do it, Emerald began chanting. She and Neo clapped excitedly. Cecil tried to look at her seriously and shake her head. She was, after all, still her caretaker, But, well, as her partner, but eagerness won out in the end. Penny closed her eyes for a moment. Nothing seemed to happen, then she opened them again and began to giggle. Oh dear, oh my, I do not know what I expected. Oh. Almost instantly, Penny shifted over and was snuggling up against Cecil like a needy puppy. She laughed gently and reached up to pet her head, which seemed to help. I believe I understand the appeal now. I wish I could just will myself in and out of drunkenness. That seems like incredibly useful. Alas, I am trapped in the analog method, Cecil sighed wistfully. She was not normally one to give up on work, but something about her new partners made life feel less stressful. The drinks didn't hurt either. Starting tomorrow, they'd be living in the dorm, so Neapolitan was of the mindset they might as well demolish as much as they could before leaving the safe house to rot. The more they drank, the friendlier everything became, and as was the usual way with alcohol, at some point, the more they drank, the friendlier everything became, as was the usual way with alcohol. At some point, Neapolitan had stolen her Barrette, and though Cecil didn't mind too much. All right, Sonny, Emerald said with a slight sultry ting to her voice, obviously ready to launch into a new discussion. Spill, what's it like, being a robot, an android, whatever? The sudden nickname didn't help, but the question itself was shocking enough. We haven't, yes, Cecil was very sulkent. Well said, there's no way this can go poorly. Oh, God, that's cute, that's so damn cute, I can't stand it. At least that's what Cecil was able to understand from Neo. Her hand movements were slurred, for lack of any better word. Trying to do text-to-speech was a nightmare waiting to happen. Hey, I will have you know that I am properly adorned. My father or maker, the scientists, want me to be superhuman. When it happens, it'll be magical. Cecil wanted to be angry at Penny for spilling so much in just a few statements, but her cuteness had a way of counteracting the grumpiness. Penny's dad is a perv, Emerald chuckled and awkwardly got up to her feet to fix another round of drinks, which was probably a terrible idea. No, Dr. Gillipo, he's not my dad. He didn't want me to get too close to them. I'm not even supposed to call the lab my home. Very important. Yeah, well, you weren't supposed to get close to Sunny there, and see what happens when you did it anyways? Adorable nerd bomber girlfriend with time powers. Breaking the rules has its perks. We should know. Emerald was slowly losing her volume control as she called across the living room area from the bar, shaking up another couple drinks. Cecil had since given up on being fancy and allowed her teammates to just make whatever she felt like. She wasn't bad at mixing. Not to mention bagging local legend Ruby Rose, if rumors are to be believed, Neo added with even sloppier hand gestures. And I've seen Cecil making suggestive eyes at Mrs. and Mrs. Checkmate. Emerald snickered. The two other turned deep red and shared a nervous look, an equally nervous smile. Well, I suppose we're both a little enchanted by Team Ruby's situation. It has a kind of freeing siren song. Oh no, she gets poetic when she's drunk, mused Emerald as she stared at Cecil down for a moment. Well, as long as you're not thinking of putting us in your crosshairs next, I think we'll be just fine. I get jealous easy. Cecil could see Penny pouting, looking at her like she was about to say something, so she clamped her hand over her mouth and stood up with a nervous laugh. Okay, well, time for bed. She hurried to rush up to the spare bedroom that she and Penny had been sharing for the last week or so. They still technically had a room at Beacon, but it became clear they would need to get used to rooming with Neo and M. The two offered them a space here instead. Even if the brownstone was kind of worn down and messy, it did have a strange homey feel to it. She and Penny had what few things they had brought with them, and the rest of their things were being sent from Atlas to Beacon, and would arrive the next day when they moved in. They got changed in their pajamas and crawled under the covers together. For a while they just lay there, in comfortable silence, but suddenly Penny shifted closer and started to wrap around her tighter. Should they have sex? Cecil's face felt like a million degrees and she was strangely terrified and looked at her partner. Penny, right now? I was contemplating what the others said, and it occurs to me that this might be our last night with some private time. But I suppose I was also asking in the more long-term, hypothetical sense as to whether that would be something you might like. Cecil gave a soft sigh of something resembling relief. She should have known Penny was just missing a social detail. It happens on occasion, but the question still gave her a sense of anxiety that she hadn't been expecting. She finally turned over so she could face her, curling in against her android girlfriend. Not right now, but maybe someday. She paused a moment or two to gather her thoughts, and she could see that Penny was concentrating on regaining her facilities, essentially losing her inebriated state. If only humans could be so lucky. I grew up in Atlas, though my parents and extended family are originally from Vacuo. As a brown girl in a country mostly occupied by pale people who look at me with a mix of curiosity and veiled contempt. I add that to my tendency to internalize everything, and I never really learned to appreciate myself. My body has always felt foreign to me. I'm not exactly comfortable with intimacy. Penny nodded seriously and hugged her a little closer, playing with her hair. I am a thing. I was created in a lab to mimic a human. All the things that make me appear like one of you, they're synthetic. But I can still taste food. I can feel how warm you are. I can sense affection. I have an aura. She looked into Cecil's eyes, and it was really clear for a split second that humanity didn't exist in just in the organic, but it took time to get there and patience. Let us remember your help. And let us remember your help. So, if it takes a while, I understand completely. Cecil shifted and planted a gentle kiss on Penny's lips, amazed as always at just how perfect they felt. I truly care for you, Penny Pill. I'm not even trying to pronounce her last name. And I'm sure with your help someday I'll feel perfectly safe around you. I look forward to it. She had meant to use the word love, but for some reason still felt like too much too soon. Penny didn't seem to mind though. She claimed another kiss for herself with a tiny giggle. I look forward to it as well, Cecil Solon? Chapter 2. Fading Memories, Blending into Dull Table Lux. Okay. I feel though I've been lied to, Irma said with a dejected sigh. She glanced around her new dorm room. Between spending time in the guest dorms and then crashing with Neo at that swanky pad, perhaps her standards had been raised a bit. But this was the most bare-bones thing she'd ever seen. Empty walls and plain style, not to mention just how much real estate was taken up by the 4 beds and 4 desks. At least, for once, all 4 of them seemed to be in hearty agreement. Yes, this is rather unimpressive. Cecil walked up to one of the beds and crouched down to investigate it closer, a small smile creeping over her lips. Well, I might have a few ideas. If you'll forgive me for assuming we only need 2 beds, yes? How dare you? I was thinking we might need 1 bed. I'm insulted. Emerald knew she had a way of pushing her luck, but she couldn't always help herself around these 2. Their reactions were priceless, but even Neil looked a little bit shocked. Oh geez, calm down. I was having a little bit of fun. Anyways, what's this grand plan of yours, Brainiac? We can't just lug these bad boys out of the room. And as much fun as it would be, I don't think they'd like us hucking them out the window. If you'll forgive me for assuming we really... Okay. I highly doubt Cecil's plan was to huck anything out a window, Emerald. Penny joined her in inspecting the beds, obviously just as curious about whatever the real plan was. For any academy this size, the beds have to be prefab. You can take them apart into their component boards with a simple set of tools. She got up and over to the pile of boxes bearing her name and began rooting through them until she hauled out a rather massive case bearing the Atlas seal on it. I just got a shiny new toolkit to help make easy repairs on Penny. I can have these broken down in no time at all. Napoleon gave Penny a tap on the shoulder, bouncing on the balls of her feet. Well, she's working on that. How's about the three of us go raid the old safe house for some decorations and things? Penny, think you can haul that big cozy sofa? The plan was pretty crazy, but even Neo was getting on board now, so there wasn't exactly much Emerald could say about it. Penny nodded excitedly and gave a decisive clap. Naturally, my servos are quite capable. So that's how they spent the next few hours, heading to and fro with piles of random odds and ends, a couch, a large hollow television. Everyone figured as the safe house was going to be eventually discovered, they might as well strip it for everything they could. As promised, Robo Penny was crazy strong and able to lift and carry the more cumbersome objects without even straining. Emerald was starting to appreciate the possibilities. Having an android on Teen I'm not going to say the team name. Well, they were out. Cecil had indeed managed to break down two of the beds and had shoved all the spare boards into the closet. As an afterthought, she doubled the mattresses on the two beds, which promised to be instantly comfortable. They had a happy little chill pad in the corner with the TV and couch, and the wall plastered with posters and stolen warning signs. It was an elastic mix, yet undoubtedly their room. They were admiring their improved space when a knock on the door drew their attention. Emerald popped open the door and was a little surprised to see Winter Schnee standing there on the other side of the door. "Hello, girls. You mind if I come in?" A bit bewildered, Emerald stepped aside and the woman came in, casting a glance around the place with a small nod. Well, seems you've made yourself at home, they though did they mess up and only give you two beds? I'll contact housing to make sure they fix that." Cecil coughed nervously, adjusting her gloves idly, trying to be casual as possible. "Oh, actually, that was us, Miss Snee." She gave an exasperated sigh, gripping the bridge of her nose for a few moments. As a representative of both the Estonian military and the scientists' R&D division, I really ought to tell you that's unwise to pull this kind of thing on your first day, but kinda hard to be too judgmental when you're shacking up with the head mistress, Napoleon signed while snickering. Emerald began to laugh with her, though Cecil and Penny looked a bit shocked. It wasn't until looked in the woman's direction that she saw the way she glared at them and knew that once again Neo's big fat hands had gotten them in trouble. "I'm going to ignore that. I suggest the two of you remember that you're here as part of punishment and rehabilitation program. You may have experienced a degree of cavalier freedom in your previous lives, but if you can't show yourselves to be model students, you'll be placed in jail right alongside your old friends." Emerald crossed her arms and stared at Winter down. "So did you come by just to judge our aesthetic choice, or was there something you needed? Since I'm already staying in Vale without much else in the way of things to do, I've been brought into Beacon as an adjutant professor, as well as your advisor, to make sure you're all adjusting to the school. This place is a far stretch different from Atlas, and frankly, even I am going to need some time to get used to it. I'm sorry for getting off on the wrong foot here," she managed with a smile that was actually pretty charming. "Please come by my office once you have your schedules. I need to set meeting times with all of you. Now, I should go check on my sister and yell at her, too." The fact she had actually used the joke got everyone to laugh good naturally, and they waved goodbye to Winter as she headed down the hall. Emerald gently shut the door and looked at the others, shaking her head in disbelief. "It's going to be a very strange year, isn't it?" Cecil and Penny were early risers because, of course, they were. Neither Emerald nor Napoleon were quite so lucky. Only Penny's incessant cheer was able to rouse them. Not because of its stunning positivity, but because it had a way of grating on one's nerve when they weren't eager to get out from under the covers. As expected, waking up sucked, and the uniform sucked, and having to walk all over campus sucked. And basically, Emerald was in a kind of grumpy mood. At least the free food in the cafeteria wasn't bad. She found a spot to sit with Coco and her crew, while Penny and Cecil went to join their crushes in Team RWBY. She knew she couldn't rag on them too hard, since even Neo had admitted drunkenly the other night that she wouldn't mind a chance to climb Yang like a tree if it wasn't as if she didn't understand why. Well, if it isn't the wayward children, how's student life at Beacon so far? Coco did her usual thing, peering at the two of them over the top rim of her sunglasses with a little smirk. Emerald grumbled as she took a long draw from her coffee mug, while Neapolitan, I'm sorry, made some vague hand signals that did not in any way correlate to actual words. This caused all of Teen Sniv to bust out laughing. Emerald shoved a large amount of eggs into her mouth and chewed her way through it for a few moments. It has its upsides. I'm not sure I'm looking forward to classes, which are like most of your first year. But hey, if you survive to your second, you get to go out on grim hunting expeditions and stuff. And you've got a great team backing you, chimed in the rabbit-eared one. Emerald hadn't actually met Velvet before. She was a quiet girl with a weird accent. But she didn't seem too bad. Team Mindfuck, Napoleon added, bumping fists with Emerald as the two chuckled. Everyone else looked on in mild confusion. Sorry, inside joke. Anyway, Fox mused in an attempt to slip past that minor awkward moment. What's your class schedule looking like? Emerald fumbled for her scroll between bits of bacon. Oh yeah, grim biology with Port, history of the hunt with Oblek, and something Professor Snee is calling tactics and semblance. Not entirely sure what that is or why that class meets up on the Vial in the Coliseum. Well, we can grill her on it when we pop into her office later, Neo reminded her, and she nodded with a little shrug. They continued to eat amid cheerful conversation. Every now and then Emerald could feel herself getting swept away by this place. To think that not long ago she was cursing all these people for how nice and good they were. Now she was practically one of them. Weird how quickly things could change. But it was just like she had been saying. Being here provided her with a home and a kind of family, food and something productive to do with herself. If all of this panned out, she could be a huntress and basically spend the rest of her life taking down Grandma and being badass. There was worse ways to live. After this morning's rather disastrous meeting with Professor Snee, it was incredibly fulfilling to accidentally walk in on her and Goodwitch mid-kiss. Both women immediately separated from one another, looking like they might die from embarrassment. It was, if Emerald was being honest, delicious revenge. Judge us for sharing beds, will you? Goodwitch rushed out of the office, giving the team a courteous nod. Red-faced and tight-lipped, all four of them wisely chose to say nothing until Schnee had composed herself and leaned up against the edge of her desk. How are you girls doing? How were your first few classes? Wonderful. I think it took me some time to adjust to Dr. Oblek's, speed, but after a time it felt normal. Penny was cheerful as usual. Cecil nodded enthusiastically. Neither Emerald nor Nia wanted to beat down that positivity, so they just shrugged non-committedly. Thank you for stopping by. I actually had a quick request to make of you all today. Today will be my first time leading or teaching a class, and I do not like being inadequate. And that requires honest feedback. Emerald and Napoleon. Neapolitan. I'm going to keep messing this up. I know that you are in particular not afraid to hold back if there's something I do wrong. If I'm to be a teacher here at Beacon, the least I can do is make sure I'm properly engaging. The four of them shared a quick look before turning back towards Winter in mild surprise. This was rather unexpected. M cleared her throat and attempted to dig a little deeper. I mean, you want it, you got it, but why so worried? You already have the professor aesthetic down okay. She sighed and crossed her arms. God, I just can't talk. She sighed and crossed her arms, staring down at the floor. I'm attempting to combine the teaching style I received at Atlas with a more impulsive style that is so prevalent here at Beacon. It's not going to be an easy task. Also, unlike most of the other courses here, mine's intended to be almost exclusively focused on combat and training of various kinds. She cleared her throat again, trying to bore a hole through the carpet with her eyes. It would just be nice to have a reason to stay in Vale a little longer. For Weiss. God, you could You could just feel your heart breaking into a million little pieces, but you would have to be so easy to point out. It would have been so easy to point out that what Winter's intentions were. But Emerald kept herself in check and just offered a cocky smile. You got it, Teach. I'll make you wish you'd never asked me for an honest assessment. Chapter 3. It, it's fine if it's not in me. It's fine if it's not in me. Okay. Penny wasn't really looking forward to Professor Sneeze's class. Well, the title of it certainly sounded fascinating in theory. The truth of the matter was that she just didn't have a semblance of her own. She liked combat and tactics, but what was she supposed to do if she wasn't even able to conjure a power on the spot? Amity Coliseum felt like such a strange place when there was no audience or decorations. Now it was a little more than just a wide open plain for everyone to stand on. At Professor Sneeze's insistence, everyone had changed into their combat attire, and despite being in class about fighting, they were all weaponless. Everyone stood around chatting idly until Winter arrived, clearing her throat to catch their attention. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining me here. It's an honor to work with such a fine group of hunters in training. This class is going to be focused on training you to be more efficient in combat, working on your skills with weapons, semblances, formulating battle plans, and more. My first goal is to make is yep. My first goal is making sure that everyone feels comfortable with their abilities. Your semblance is part of you, and you can't reliably depend on it if you're wasting all your energy summoning it once or twice. It should feel as natural as swinging a sword or dodging an attack. Everyone pair up a student from a different team and engage each other in hand-to-hand combat, focusing on using your semblances, while simultaneously studying your opponent to find their strengths and weaknesses. Everyone began pairing up, but Penny couldn't shake her nerves. She approached Winter cautiously and gave her the best smile. Professor, should I sit this portion of class out? I could go cheer on the rest of my team, perhaps. Winter shook her head and matched her with an equally warm smile. There's no need, Penny. You'll be working with me. Cecil, go form a triplet with 2 other students. Her partner nodded and went off to join Ruby and Pura, leaving the 2 of them alone now. I have been properly filled in by the scientists at Alice. According to them, the idea that you have both an aura and a semblance is plausible but unlikely. I'm now dedicated to proving them wrong. So today, we're going to have a friendly fight with the assumption that you most definitely do have one. With little warning, Winter assumed combat stance. Penny squeaked and hurried to take one of her own. She was not nearly so certain as her instructor, but what if they are right? But what if they are right? The old woman shrugged and leapt in a series of blows while Penny deflected them skillfully. What if the engine holding Vale in the sky should break, and we all plummet down to the city below? What if Cinder should suddenly return and threaten to kill us all? What if Grim should form the city again? If you wade into the what-ifs, you might get caught up and carried out to sea. Stay in the here and now. Don't worry about going easy on me, she said before launching a fury of kicks in Penny's direction, then putting some distance between the 2 of them with glyphs. Just as fluidly, she backflipped onto another glyph. Penny could tell her teacher was coming in for a hard hit. What happened next was hard for Penny to really describe, as several things occurred in quick succession. She felt a tugging at her fingertips, which was a sensation normally reserved when she drew her swords. But rather than her back, the tiny threads were extending out towards the series of glyphs that Winter was summoning. Penny instinctively twitched her fingers, and suddenly the glowing circle turned a shade of green. She knew, without knowing, that it was no longer Professor Sneeze. That glyph belonged to her. Intuitively, she ramped up the power output and watched with great fascination as Winter's foot hit the mark and immediately launched her much farther forward than she had expected. Penny gave another tug, putting the glyph in her path and dropping its power into the negative, effectively reversing the professor's acceleration and sending her head over the heels. Winter only barely managed to flip herself around to land on her feet, but the change in velocity had been enough to make her slide backwards several more feet, kicking up a huge cloud of dust. Most everyone in the class had turned to see what could make the flawless Ice Queen lose her composure for even a second. She stood up and brushed herself off, looking around at all of them in a huff. Go back to your practicing. She walked over to Penny and stared her up and down in silence. My glyphs are never sloppy. What did you do? Penny took a few steps back, uncertain if Winter's face was displaying pride or anger. I do not know. My body just responded like I already knew what I had to do. I did not hurt you, did I? Winter seemed to be suddenly remember that she could be over militaristic, and her face softened slightly. Why don't we try that again? Whatever your power may be, it may require a more gentle touch to avoid causing serious injury. Do not worry about me. I can handle myself. So they started over. It was difficult for Penny at first, reminding her of the way she felt when she first started using her swords. She would drop them or get tangled up in her own threads, but it took time and patience to learn how to swing them around herself or to form a laser barrage. She knew this would take time too, and having proper support made her feel a lot better. But hijacking Winter's glyphs wasn't always a perfect process. Sometimes she would intend to make one dissipate, but instead she would merely reposition it. At one point, she caused one to rotate 90 degrees, launching Professor Snee off the side with a shocked look on her face. It technically had been a successful move, just not the one she wanted. Despite the warning they had received to go back to work, soon the others all gathered around to watch the fight as it played out, over and over again. Through each new iteration, Penny swelled with pride to hear them cheering for her as she altered another panel to shoot Winter up into the air, instead of straight at her, then conjure one of her own instead of merely stealing it, to shoot her back at the ground. She had managed to land it safely, but she was starting to look winded. Ha, very good, Miss Penny. Now the tricky part begins. Your semblance is directly tied to the semblance of others. It'll take a great deal of trial and error to see what you can and cannot do. Ruby Rose? Ruby stepped forward with her hand raised. Here, ma'am. I believe there may be benefits to Penny's semblance as well. Penny, you're going to help Ruby move faster and more accurately. Does that sound like something you might be able to do? Penny bounced excitedly. I'll do my best. She waited patiently as Ruby steadied herself, then disappeared into a cloud of leaves. For some reason, the incident with Cinder and the maiden had altered her semblance slightly, adding fall leaves to her rose petal streak. As she zipped around the gathered crowd in a circle, Penny concentrated on her friend, feeling that little spark of hope when Ruby's swirling cape suddenly began dropping bright green leaves and cherry blossoms instead. With a cry of delight, the young huntress became even more of a bowler as her path continued to circle up higher over everyone's heads until she peaked directly above them in a large burst of leaves and petals, falling back down right into Penny's arms with a bright giggle. That was amazing. I was like, zoom, zoom, zoom. You're so cool, Penny. She sat down. She set down her own. Wow, this is really terribly worded. She set her down, only for Ruby to pull her into an incredibly tight hug. Sorry, I had to reword that sentence. As much as Professor Snee was intent on keeping class time focused on more useful lessons, things eventually devolved into all of, all of Penny's friends eagerly calling out, me next, and begging her to try augmenting or diminishing their semblances. She used one of Blake's stone doubles to trip her up. She reversed Kira's polarity to give herself added momentum for an attack. Emerald could create much more intense illusions without feeling like her head was going to explode. The Apollyon's illusionary creations became much more solid and not immediately shatter. Cecil could almost stop someone. Good lord. Cecil could stop someone almost entirely rather than merely slowing them down. Marriott's force field was almost invincible, even in the face of a mighty blow from Nora's hammer. It may not have been the most perfect class time for their teacher, but it was exactly what Pyrrha needed. Penny's positivity didn't last forever though. In light of her success, and also to act as a formal welcome to Team Champagne, everyone pitched in to throw a pizza party in the common room. It was fun for a while, but something kept eating at the android. It was hard to think properly, much less actually enjoy yourself. So Penny disappeared and ended up finding herself on the roof. Unsure exactly why, she sat down on the edge and stared up at the stars above, hoping she might find a moment's peace or an answer to why she didn't feel as excited as she should have. The silence helped, but it came without answers. The door opened. The door behind her opened. Someone approached where she sat. Penny wasn't certain who she had expected, but it definitely wasn't MRPN Captain Marriott. She smiled weakly and nodded her head. Mind if I join you? I always get little worn out at parties, even small ones. Penny nodded again, making some space for her on the ledge. Please be my guest. Rather than saying anything, Marriott Gold simply sat there with her, and the two of them shared the beautiful silence of the night together. For a while, it was nearly 3 minutes before her temporary companion spoke. I've always been pretty self-conscious of my subwants. It's super inconsistent, and I can only ever make it really work when I'm in serious trouble. Today was the first time I ever felt like I had a handle on it, because of you. I felt powerful, really powerful, and I wanted to thank you for that. Penny brightened up a little to know that she'd actually helped someone, especially by using her semblance. It was my pleasure. I greatly enjoy having a semblance that can be so useful for so many people. Is that why you came to find me? Actually, you seemed kind of down and then just disappeared. Is everything okay? Penny searched for words that might make sense of her feelings. Marigold, do you ever feel less than? Her brow furrowed slightly as she stared at Penny, deep in concentration. Well, of course, I mean, it's pretty common for girls like me. Like you? Why you specifically? A series of other emotions washed over Marigold's face that Penny did not know how to interpret. The only one that seemed familiar was a kind of dawning realization at the end. Of course, you, of course, you probably never heard. When I came to Beacon, my name was Jean, and as far as everyone was concerned, I was a boy. But I knew that wasn't right, so I stopped being a boy, and now I have medications and new clothes. I'm growing out my hair, and most of my friends are happy for me, but other people will never be alright with me. Even if I were 99% girl, they would think that remaining 1% I haven't changed still makes me a boy. My broad shoulders or my voice or whatever. It's not always easy, but I have to remind myself that those people don't matter. What matters is me and my happiness and my friends. She chuckled and leaned over to nudge her. Sorry, I hope some of that rambling did the trick. It hardly even occurred to Penny that Marigold might have been transgender, but then her experiences in life were so limited sometimes. It changed a little, and that realization brought back a memory from months before. I remember telling Ruby once that I was not a real girl, and she was so very nice and understanding, and she told me I actually was, simply by virtue of who I am. I suppose she must have told you the same. The two shared a laugh in honor of their enthusiastic friend. Still, my position is not exactly like yours. I'm attempting to reconcile the possibility that I am a real girl, but an android at the same time. I I still have a lot to learn, but Ren knows way more about this kind of stuff. Sometimes people aren't male or female. Sometimes they're something else entirely. And if that can be said about anyone, well, Penny, you're definitely something else. You're special and pretty cool. So maybe it's okay if you don't know. Perhaps just being amazing can be good enough for now? Penny latched on to Marigold suddenly, squeezing her in a tight vice hug. Thank you, Marigold Arc. I suppose this makes us even. And that's where I'm gonna end it for now. This is literally my first recording, so I'm not very confident in my reading abilities. Uh, no, this won't be running any edits. I believe that you guys should hear how I read it the first time around. Maybe a second read through most, but I won't be doing any edits. And I thank you for staying around all this time to hear the story. The reading. This is the reading corner, and I'll see you next time.